Starting with the murder of Severus Alexander, the crisis of the 3rd century was marked by economic disaster, civil war, and foreign invasions. It was a miracle that the crisis didn't bring the empire crashing down, with it only due to the thanks of a few competent soldier emperors in the latter part of the period that the empire was recovered. In 235, Severus Alexander was murdered by his own troops while campaigning on the Rhine. This was because of his plan to bribe the enemies away instead of fighting them, angering his soldiers, but their worst grievances was how Severus listened to his mother on running the empire. After killing Alexander, the legions on the Rhine raised Maximinus Thrax to the imperial purple, with the new emperor giving a generous donative to the army by debasing the currency, which will be seen far too often happening throughout this period. During Maximinus' 3-year reign, he never stepped foot into Rome, instead choosing to remain with his troops on the Rhine. In 236, he raised his son to junior co-emperor, while the resurgent Persians, now called the Sassanids, ravaged the eastern frontier, with Maximinus choosing to sit on his hands about the Sassanids. He wasted the next year campaigning in Dacia, while also facing increasing internal dissent, with things coming to a head when in 238 the proconsul of Africa, Gordian I, was proclaimed emperor, and was immediately recognized by the Senate. Luckily for Maximinus, the governor in a neighboring province of Numidia stayed loyal, and marched his legion against Gordian's son, who only led a volunteer force that was cut down by the soldiers. When Gordian I heard the news of his son's death, he committed suicide. Even as the rebellion was crushed, the Senate was too late to change their decision, so they decided to choose two of their own, Balbinus and Pupienus. But on the day they were proclaimed, the people rioted, forcing them to take Gordian III as the third co-emperor. When Maximinus marched down to Italy, he was stuck besieging Aquileia, where his own officers grew tired of him, killing him and announcing their support to the emperors chosen by the Senate. However, after 3 months, Balbinus and Pupienus were murdered by the Praetorian Guard. Now the empire was ruled by a 13-year-old. In 244, he was defeated by the Sassanids and killed in the aftermath of the battle, whether by the Sassanids or the two Praetorian prefects is unknown, but most scholars suspect the latter. After Gordian's death, the younger of the two Praetorian prefects, Philip, took the throne, immediately giving 500,000 gold coins to Shapur, the king of the Sassanids, in exchange for peace, and while Shapur basked in glory, he raced back to Rome. In 247, he celebrated the 1000th anniversary of Rome's founding with a lavish festival, but 2 years after the celebrations, Philip sent a general named Decius to defend the Danube. Decius successfully campaigned against the raiders, with his army quickly proclaiming him as the emperor, while Philip died fighting him in the Battle of Verona. 2 years later, in June 251, Decius was chasing down a group of Goths, meeting them in battle near Abatricius, where the boggy ground worked against him, and the Goths slaughtered the army, killing him and his son. Gallus, the new emperor, fought the Goths off, but before long, he was dead by 253, when Aemilianus, the governor of Moesia, defeated a group of Goths and was faithfully proclaimed as a new emperor by his legions. Both Aemilianus and Gallus were dead before the year was out, with Valerian succeeding the throne. He planned a new counterattack against the Sassanids, but was distracted by Gothic sea raids on the coast of Turkey. Finally, in 260, he marched out to meet the Sassanids. After being defeated twice at Carrhae and Edessa, Valerian was captured by the Sassanids, and according to some accounts, he was forced to drink molten gold, but most historians believe the story to be false. Whatever the case, the situation in the east was only salvaged by Onathus, a Palmyrene nobleman, who successfully expelled Shapur from Roman territory and even marched on Ctesiphon in 262. Onathus was killed in 267 by a disgruntled cousin and was succeeded nominally by his son, Valabathus. But true power laid in his mother's hands, Zenobia. Back west, Gallienus, the son of Valerian, became the new emperor, but in 260 he lost control of most of the western provinces, with Postumus declaring himself emperor and establishing the Gallic Empire with all of Gaul and Britain breaking off. Gallienus' reign was pretty long by the 3rd century standards, but unluckily for him, in 268, he was stabbed to death by his own officers. His successor, Claudius II, spent most of his short reign fighting and winning against the Goths. Early 270, he died of plague, being the first emperor to die from natural causes since Septimus Severus, more than 5 decades ago. His brother, Quintilius, was proclaimed as the new emperor, but just months later, he was challenged by Aurelian, meeting him in battle. But before the battle could even start, Quintilius' own troops switched sides, with the emperor committing suicide. Aurelian was now raised to the imperial purple. He spent his first 4 years beating back Germanic raiders and building the Aurelian walls. Aurelian now turned to the Pauline Empire, which had recently in 270 taken Egypt by force, while in 271 the last straw finally broke when Zenobia declared her son Augustus and herself as Augusta. In 272, Aurelian marched into Pauline-held Asia Minor and made quick work of it, while also defeating the Pauline army twice in Syria and began to besiege Palmyra itself. Also around this time, Egypt was taken back, while Palmyra fell soon after the queen was captured while trying to flee. And once again, Aurelian showed his generosity by not sacking the city, but next year in 273, the city rebelled again. This time, Aurelian had enough and destroyed the whole entire city. But in 274, he attacked the Gallic Empire, defeating their new leader, Tetricus, in battle. But fortunately for Tetricus, he was spared, and even appointed to a position in Italy. In 274, Aurelian returned back to Rome, celebrating a triumph, with both Tetricus and Zenobia being allowed to live out the rest of their lives in peace. Even Aurelian was not immune to the crisis, as in 275, while preparing a new campaign, he was killed by his own officers, and it would take a few weeks to finally pick a new emperor. Tacitus was named the new emperor from his one-year reign, having him mostly defend the Anatolian coast from Gothic raiders across the sea. But once again, the emperor was killed by his own soldiers in 276. After Tacitus, the Praetorian prefect Florian was proclaimed emperor, but he was dead by September, when a usurper named Probus was preparing to fight Florian, but as it turned out that Florian's own troops killed him. Probus spent his reign competently ruling the empire, with the Romans enjoying many victories while suffering little to no defeats. But he wasn't popular, with a group of officers killing him and choosing Carus, one of their own, to become emperor. Carus and Numerian, his son and co-emperor, prepared an expedition against the Sassanids, with the offensive seeing great success, but after capturing Ctesiphon, Carus was likely murdered, with his son succeeding him. Numerian was also killed next year, with the army officers rallying behind Diocletian as the new emperor. He fought and crushed Carinus, the other son of Carus, with Diocletian's ascension marking the end of the crisis and the beginning of the late empire. Now we can examine the key factors in the crisis, starting with a crashing economy due to the debasement of silver in the coins, for the emperors to pay the soldiers, starting from Septimus Severus, who debased the currency from 75% silver to 50%. This marked a steady trend of debasing the coin, which by the reign of Aurelian was reduced to 4%, causing hyperinflation, breaking the economy when the empire needed it most. Next was the succession of the emperors, because although there was a tradition to pick someone outside a family and train them to be the next emperor, it was only a tradition. There were no hard rules on succession, while all you needed to do to become emperor was to be proclaimed by the army and the senate. So anybody could be raised to the purple, which would cause, as we saw earlier, massive problems. The Roman Empire could have weathered the storm of internal problems, even if it had to take some beating. But they were now faced with resurgent powers on their frontiers, especially with the new Sassanids and the large Germanic confederations looking down like vultures on a collapsing empire. Luckily for the Romans, they were saved, at least this time for now. The crisis would yearly play out once again in the 5th century for the Western Roman Empire, but this time, Rome fell.